Welcome to the inaugural episode of No Agenda, sponsored by Caesars Entertainment, a cutting-edge video broadcast that reports on current events and breaking news in the meetings, hospitality, and tourism industry. I'm Sarah Soliman, coming to you from the Soliman Productions studio in Orlando, Florida.
And I'm Courtney Stanley, coming to you from Detroit, Michigan. We are thrilled to partner together to bring you industry content with No Agenda twice a month. No Agenda is an independent broadcast that will air every other Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch our broadcast from both of our personal social media channels on the Soliman Productions website and through our exclusive distribution partner, Meetings Today.
We are honored to kick off our very first episode of No Agenda with our sponsor, Caesars Entertainment, and our very first guest joining me here in studio, Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events. And Tracy, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you for joining us in our studio.
I'm so excited that I can make this happen. Yeah.
Me too. Now, Tracy, I like to think of you as a trifecta. You are a planner, you're a consultant, and you're a speaker, and you focus heavily on food and beverage. Yep. And you've really educated the industry over the past few years on food and beverage. But today I really want to focus on accessibility and inclusion when it comes to F&B, and in today's landscape especially. So let's start off with accessibility. Okay. What does that even mean when we look at food and beverage and accessibility?
Accessibility means that all the attendees can actually access the food. And one of the terms that I've really come up with in the last couple of years, especially having launched my podcast and talking about this, is that it's what's on the plate. And somebody who has food allergies can access the plate, meaning they have something to eat. But it's also somebody else, everyone else, can they access it, get to that plate? So it's making sure that the routes to the plate are open for everyone, as well as what is on the plate is open for everyone. So it's accessible.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, you know, now more than ever, and I feel very ignorant up until this point. My boyfriend's father is in a wheelchair, and I've learned over the past year that accessibility truly matters because of people in wheelchairs and how do they feel included and, you know, are part of that overall experience. When we look at accessibility and the routes, as you mentioned, wheelchair accessibility, what does that look like?
I have two different stories I use about that a lot. There's one woman in our industry that utilizes a scooter when she goes to venues, and we were at an industry function and 3,000 meeting planners trying to get to lunch, and they would not allow her in the room early. And you open those doors, and and probably any industry, right, piling in to get into that room, and she then cannot maneuver her scooter through the tables, because once you sit down at a table, the chairs come out. And so, you know, providing that, what does that early access mean, right? And then another one, whereas this woman I met, we were at an industry event, and she's a wheelchair user, and she had to go to where the food function was downstairs in the basement of this hotel. She actually had to go to the back of the house, go down the kitchen hallway, take an elevator down, go down another hallway, and take another elevator down.
Wow. And
then when she came out, there was no one there to help her get the food off the buffet. There was not a server at the time. And then she wheeled her chair around, and all of the tables had 10 chairs around them. And she asked a server to remove a chair so she could wheel her chair up to it. They removed all 10 chairs and put a handicap sign on the table.
Wow.
And to me, that's not accessibility. Somebody who's visually impaired, you know, how are they going to walk through that buffet? Or when that server presents the plate to them at a table, does that server know to tell them what's on the plate at what time, you know, the clock, you know, things like that. So how are we being trained, or how are we training our servers, our members of our community in providing that accessibility?
And it's not just accessibility, but it's inclusion as well. And that story, the stories that you shared, you don't feel very included if you are visually impaired, if you are, you know, in a wheelchair and you're trying to access lunch just like any other attendee would be. But what do we need to think about when it comes to creating an inclusive environment with food and beverage?
Well, the other part of that plate situation too is dietary restrictions. And I get a lot of people rolling their eyes. Oh my gosh, there's gluten-free and there's vegan and there's now reducitarian and climatarian and things. How do you do that? It's making sure that we're thinking about it from the very get-go. And it's making sure that there's gluten-free options, making sure that vegetarian options are actually vegan. So you can cut that separate plate out, right? Thinking through that up front. And there's a lot of times when I'm doing consulting and I'm looking at menus and I'll go through a buffet and then I resort that and I take that buffet all the way down and separate it out. And then I filter it by gluten-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, vegan. And the only thing gluten-free is guacamole, right? So thinking about how you do it, because it's even also the service level, how are you serving it? Like does that bruschetta, or it doesn't say it doesn't, there's like dishes that I've seen that are tomatoes and cheese. It doesn't say that it's served on bread, but then when it comes out, it's served on bread. Why aren't you telling me that communication? So it's really being transparent about it.
So there's a lot to dissect,
Yes.
right? When it comes to planning.
Digest, I like to say digest.
Even better. Digest and dissect.
Yes.
When it comes to planning overall, but particularly now with added dietary restrictions. So where do we start? What does a planner do to really ensure that they're doing things correctly when it comes to food and beverage for accessibility and also inclusion?
I think the first thing is that you actually have to ask your attendees, right? Do you have any dietary restrictions or needs that we should accommodate at the event, right? So that you can fully participate. We should be designing it to fully participate in general. So asking them and actually looking at your history. That's actually going a step backwards too. How many people ask for a vegan meal? How many people ask for a vegetarian meal? And I was talking to a chef the other day and so frustrated that a meeting planner has told them, I need 3 vegetarians. And then you see I got the vegetarian and you're like, I want it. So not only have you now wasted 10 more meals, you've gotten 10 more vegan requests at the last minute. So looking at the history of how many requests were made and then also doing the work and asking it up front.
Yeah, and so recently I'm practicing being a vegetarian on Thursdays and Thursdays only.
Okay.
So I've learned a lot over the past year. So I've found myself in these scenarios at events where, I'm not looking necessarily at the calendar, so I'm not listing myself as a vegetarian if the event happens to fall on a Thursday.
Right.
But then I arrive and I find myself in these scenarios, just like you mentioned, where I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I'm not a vegetarian usually, but today's Thursday and I would like a vegetarian meal, but I didn't request that. So it's that same exact scenario. Or I just feel like being a vegetarian today.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tracy, I want to thank you for your time. I know she's actually here in Orlando where we're based to attend an event. So this worked out perfectly. She also recorded her podcast here too. So if you have not listened to Tracy's podcast, lots of great content and great guests that she interviews about food and beverage and beyond. So where can they listen to your podcast?
You can listen to the Eating at a Meeting podcast on any podcast platform and on YouTube as well and Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Now, of course, food and beverage is not the only experience that you want to create at events. Let's check in with Courtney Stanley, who's joined by CEO of George P. Johnson, Chris Meyer, and they're going to chat about experience design.
That's right, Sarah. Experience design is a term that we hear often by planners and suppliers alike. That's why No Agenda is breaking this next segment into a 3-part series. Joining me now is CEO of George P. Johnson, Chris Meyer. Chris, GPJ has a solid roadmap for experience design. Can you define experience design by breaking it down into 3 focus areas: digital interaction, commerce, and communication?
When you use that term, a lot of people typically jump right to the design phase. And our process at GPJ is ensuring that we start with the strategic brief, right? So it really starts with strategy, and not strategy that kind of interferes with corporate or client strategy. It's really, what is the strategy to bring that experience to life? In reality, they're all connected. And so when you're doing experience design, there's a responsibility to look across the overall experience and not look at them in silos. Clearly, there's different elements of those different components, but how do we design a macro experience that includes the digital experience, the live experience, if there is commerce happening, or any other components? You need to first look at it at a macro, then break it down by the specific tactics, if you will, as well as the personas of the audiences. And the principles of how we build a brief and how you design are the same, regardless of whether we're talking about digital, commerce, or a face-to-face experience.
Tell us about the GPJ framework for experience design. Think, feel, know, and do, and how it leads to business outcomes.
At the end of the day, that is forcing the question to be asked, what is it we want the audience to think, feel, know, and do, right? And so as long as we're thinking about the audiences, that informs our ability to design these experiences. And when you have that right, when you really, again, have a brief, you have the right design, you've thought about the outcomes of what we want the audience's participants to think, feel, know, and do, then you have the framework to actually deliver high value experiences and ensure the ROI on those events and experiences is delivered for the brands. And I can tell you so many times I've seen where some of those steps are either missed or shortcuts. And particularly on the front end, when you're thinking about kind of the strategy around the experience, or not really thinking about each audience and what we want them to think, feel, know, and do. If those things aren't properly done on the front end, the results often aren't what they could be.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing such insightful information. We're looking forward to continuing the Experience Design series with you on the next episode of No Agenda. As our industry continues to struggle with labor shortages, Experience Design is just as significant to the employee experience. Joining me now to discuss this further is Dina Lowry of the Opus Agency. Dina, with employee burnout and labor shortages impacting our industry, how do you create a desirable experience for employees, similarly to how we focus on experience design for events and brands?
Altogether, the components of a great employee experience align with the pillars that make a great brand experience. So that's sort of the first way that I look at it. And I think there is this proverbial, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. And so companies, brands need to actually put purpose and thought into employee engagement and employee events. And I think once that's done, many of those same pillars that you use in a brand experience actually come through. Internally, we look at 4 pillars for how we are working with our internal agency. Be clear on your core, first and foremost. Your vision, your mission, your values. That's the core of any business, and they need to be meaningful. They need to be shared widely. There needs to be ways that they are embedded into your communications and your programs so they're understood. It's a lexicon that's learned. So be very intentional about that. Spend time together. And we are almost 60% remote. So when I say that, I fully understand what I'm saying when I say spend time together. But in this world of the virtual meetings, the Zoom meetings, really put intention behind that. So it's invest in experiences that bring people together. This can be in person, like a Welcome Week program. So internally at Opus, we do a Welcome Week program. It's about 2.5 days. It's called Welcome Week, but it's about 2.5 days. With so much of our employee base now remote, which means we can hire in multiple locations, which has actually opened us up to diverse talent from all over the world, actually, which is fantastic. But we bring them into what we would consider headquarters for about 2.5 days so that there is some semblance of coming together. And what we've found, both with our brand events and our own client events, is if there can be at least one connection in person, all of the remote feels different because you've had that connection. So we put a lot of thought into what we have is a Welcome Week or an annual kickoff, even if it is remote, putting a lot of thought into that. We also say internally, a shirt can create a team. And swag does matter, even in this sustainability atmosphere that we're in, which is super important. But there are some really, really good sustainable manufacturers out there. And some of that culture and fit it makes a really big impact when there is shared culture and there is shared swag. You have to be mindful about it. I get that, but it does mean something. And then there are, beyond what I just talked about, clear voice, be clear on your core, spend time together, build that culture and that team, embrace the other pillars that actually happen at brand experiences. And that is the storytelling, the environment and branding, having the same Zoom backgrounds. If you do have an office, have environmental and people come in a couple days a week or something, putting thought into that. And then finding out your key ambassadors. At Opus, we have a tagline, "We are Opus Agency." It's hashtag "We are Opus Agency." And that has really brought the team together. They use it in their social. We use it on our Slack channels. We use it when we're on site at events. And so putting in some of that exact same stuff that you would do at a brand experience, intentionally bringing that into your internal team experiences.
Dina, thank you so much for your insight. Now on to another hot topic taking our industry by storm, artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence has been at the forefront of conversations across the industry. But how can AI be incorporated into events? Here to spill all the tea is tech guru Dalia Elgazar with Dalia Plus Agency. Dalia, how are you seeing AI integrated into events?
Let's talk backend or logistics and management. So basically where you see AI coming into play is, for example, it actually, and I want to say this before we say anything, this whole trend, this whole wave of AI, ChatGPT and all of this is not to replace event professionals. It is to enhance and to have event professionals be more resilient, more proactive, and more effective. So this is not to replace jobs or anything of the sort. This is to help. So when you talk about AI, we are talking about, for example, where you have insights on journeys, different attendee type journeys around the show floor or within the whole entire event design, the breakout sessions, knowing where you're going to have to change rooms because the sessions are too popular and the breakout rooms are too set up too small, for example. This is where you would be able to have almost like your assistant in regards to insights. Do this, how about try this, etc. So think of AI where it is also for the attendees, it's doing a better job of, we've seen it already, like with Grip and Jublia, where it's the matchmaking. It's the matchmaking between the content that Sarah wants to consume at a show, the people that Sarah wants to hang out with, but it's also going to be used on the forefront where it's from the marketing side. So for example, you will be able to have AI help you match different buyers to different products that are on the show floor, depending on their profile, depending on their wants and needs. Take it a step forward where it's actually showcasing it to them almost as teasers, but guiding them to where they can go to find out those products or those solutions that they want during an event. From a marketing side, we are talking about being in an agility era. You're going to have so much capabilities where you will be able to create more. So you hear about the prompts and everything with AI and ChatGPT. This is where you're going to be able to have prompts to help you create content on the fly. So for example, South by Southwest, there was one presentation, one presenter actually created his old presentation on the stage via AI, the session, the creative, everything of the sort. So this is where we don't do best. We don't do best thinking outside of the box. But the box right now, it's almost like the Matrix. There is no spoon. There is no box. AI has actually come to a point where everything from data, knowledge base, even images like through Midjourney and DALL-E, for example, you will be able to do more quickly.
Now walk us through an event AI starter kit for those planners that want to take baby steps.
The starter kit really has to start with a group discussion on where you can create better efficiencies. Where can you create an AI as an assistance in regards to insights, in regards to marketing, in regards to content, or even video, where you can have something like Descript, take your video, transcribe it, turn it into sound bites, snackable content, etc., to help you out, to help, what your goals are. The starter kit has to start with, what do you need to have happen in order to make your life easier, in order to give you more insights to create better experiences.
Dahlia, thank you. Much more coming up on No Agenda, including a look into 3 technology tips to ensure your next corporate event runs smoothly. That and more coming up after a short break from our sponsor, Caesars Entertainment. Welcome back, everyone. I am joined now by Jo Fostock with Expo Digital and her +1. She's expecting her first baby next month, so congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Very exciting, and I'm glad you both can join us today on No Agenda.
It was one or all of us.
It was one or, exactly. Well, I'm glad you could both be here together.
Thank you.
And one day baby will watch this interview.
Yes.
I know that he was on camera and he's a rock star. Well, we're here to talk about tech tips, and there's a really interesting blog on the Expo Digital website, and it's 5 tech tips to ensure that your event goes seamlessly. And technology is for sure at the forefront of every conversation, especially post-COVID. Yes, and you live and breathe this every day. So this is why I wanted to make sure we got her on the show to chat through some of these tips. We're going to outline 3 of the 5. And the remaining you can check out expodigital.com for more. But before we dive into that, let's talk about Expo Digital and what you guys do.
Absolutely. So Expo Digital is a company that's been around for a little over 20 years, specializing basically in conference internet. We started at our grassroots, just going out and working with technology and software companies to build a temporary infrastructure for internet that isn't normally at a venue. So if you're into a convention center or a hotel property that maybe doesn't have exactly what you need, we can customize that for every single event. One of our larger customers is a 40,000 person conference that we do out in San Francisco every year. So just a lot of different diversity there.
Yeah, and internet is certainly a hot topic, right? I feel, and even for us at Soliman Productions, we've collaborated with Expo Digital on many fronts, including, working with you guys to ensure we have seamless connectivity for our live streams.
Yes.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about, how you partner with venues? Because a lot of venues already have the infrastructure, they have internet. So what does it look like to bring Expo Digital in to the mix and ensure added connectivity?
I think that's the biggest thing, is it is a partnership. We're not trying to overtake, we're not trying to step on anyone's toes. We're simply just trying to fix any holes that there might be. And a lot of these infrastructures that were built out 20, 30 years ago, the needs weren't where they are now. I think that's obvious. Technology has skyrocketed. So some of these venues might have black spots or holes in their internet and their infrastructure. So what we do is we come in and just fix those simple items. One thing might be registration. You might be working with a platform that needs, a certain amount of bandwidth in one area for the registration to ensure that all of that data is flowing properly and that is saved in real time. But if there's a saturation of people or it's more high density than what the infrastructure was built for, we can customize that and really build it out for what it is that you need. And it doesn't have to be, this area has to be registration for every event. Now that you can customize that, you can really utilize the space as you'd like.
Love that. So now's a good time to get out your event planning checklist.
Yes.
Because we're going to go through some of the tips that we mentioned,
Yes.
right? So the first tip is to ask important questions. What are some important questions to ask?
It would be so simple just to say, make sure you ask important questions. Wouldn't that be the easy way of doing things? No, but we were joking before this, and they don't teach you this stuff in school. So yes, this is definitely time to take some notes. One of the questions is, am I going to have support on site? And who is that going to be dedicated for my event? So while you might have one contact for a hotel or a convention center that's answering your questions via email leading up to the event itself, who's going to be boots on the ground and who am I calling when something bad happens or something unexpected happens? That's really important for you to know exactly who you're going to be connected with and build that conversation ahead of time so that when you are calling in the 11th hour, it's nothing that either one of you are too scared to pick up the phone. That would be number one. Another one would be, okay, your venue has a certain amount of bandwidth that they have told us that they can do to support our event. Is that my bandwidth? Or am I sharing that with the guy at the pool that's watching his favorite shows on Netflix and, the kids in room 312 that are somehow playing an Xbox during my show? Is that dedicated to my event or am I sharing that with others in the venue? I think those are just two just to start with, but there's a lot of them that are on that blog that we can definitely dive into a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and we were having a conversation before we started this interview, and it's the same applies at home.
Yes.
With your bandwidth at home, you get up to whatever it is, right?
Yes.
It's not all of the bandwidth for you and only you. You're sharing with your street, your neighbor,
They don't want to tell you that piece of it, but yes, we were utilizing the illustration of, okay, I work from home, but during, the pandemic, every day at 3:45, somehow my connectivity would always fail. And why was that? And that's because everybody in my cul-de-sac on my road is sharing whatever that base number is. So if they tell you, oh, you're a gigillionaire, you have a gig of bandwidth, that's not just yours. That's yours and all of your best friends around the corner.
Yeah, that was a very much an eye-opening conversation for yours truly as well. Okay, so tip number 2 is to ask the venue what their 5-year plan is.
Yes.
So what should their roadmap look like?
This is something that planners might do on one side of things, thinking about the aesthetics of a venue and what they're doing. But more importantly than that, it's what is the infrastructure going to look like? Are there any areas that you're upgrading in the hotel? Are there any areas that might be down during my show? These are things that you will have to supplement and bring in other equipment for to ensure that you have what you need. So technology is forever changing, and a lot of venues are utilizing some of their, if they have it at any time, downtime, which I haven't seen in a while, but utilizing this time to really get back up to par with what our current needs are. And so knowing what their 5-year plan looks like will help you to know what ad hoc or supplementations that you really are going to need to make during your event.
Love that. So much to think about. Okay, and then our last and third tip that we'll share here.
Sure.
Break things down into thirds.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
So we have before the event, the actual event, and then after the event. So before the event, you're going on site visits, you're having multiple conversations about what your event is going to look like in your mind and asking those questions. And that's where ask the right questions are going to come into play, what we just kind of spoke about. During your event, monitoring. So you're there, great, fantastic, but what's happening behind the scenes that is something that I can utilize later. So with Expo Digital, for example, we have real-time monitoring that we do remotely that we can go ahead and see where is the bandwidth being used and at what times. This can help you with budget building. If you're looking at bandwidth needs, maybe you didn't need 500 megs the entire time. You needed that fully for the event, and how can you carve that out and talk to your planner about utilizing that in different times and spaces. And then the third is after the event, taking the reports that we've run for you and taking them to your next event, saying, I'm educated now, I know what I used and how I used it, how can we customize a package for my next event? And this is what I'm really looking for.
Wow. Well, this is why she's my go-to gal when it comes to all things Wi-Fi, internet, tech. Jo, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Always.
Thank you, thank you. And like I mentioned, there are other tips and other great blogs on the Expo Digital website, so make sure you check them out at expodigital.com.
Content management is often one of the most time-consuming tasks for event organizers. Companies like Session Board make this often daunting part of event planning more streamlined. Joining us to discuss this further is Andrew Asaro. Andrew, tell us more about Session Board.
Session Board is the easiest way to manage your call for papers, your speaker and content management platform. It really allows event managers to control and keep track of and really stay on top of their speakers and sponsors throughout the entire process as they lead up to their event. It really allows them to be able to communicate and organize as they're going through the process of building up to their show, really helping them get set for their events.
How does a content management system help alleviate stress for meeting planners?
If you think about things like registration, where it allows you to take in all the information about your speakers, attendees, and exhibitors, what we're doing is building out a process that really streamlines that process, not just for the event managers, but also from the speakers. So if you think about an event, a lot of the times people are really going there for content and networking, obviously business opportunities as well, but the content is really one of the larger parts, especially for shows with continuing education. So what we're trying to do is put an emphasis on that part. So allowing the speakers the easiest process possible to send in their headshots, send in their presentations, sign contracts, really accomplishing any task. And what this does is also helps the event organizer stay on track throughout the entire process. It really helps them as well to build out their agenda and then get their information where it needs to go to where it eventually becomes attendee facing.
Can you give us an example of how this has been used successfully?
One of the most recent ones that we just completed and are continuing to work with is the Clarion Group. A few of the shows that we worked with them are the PowerGen International. We also did HydraVision, Distributech, just to name a few. And they've called it one of the best investments that they made because of the time that they got back utilizing our software to help manage their speakers throughout that call for paper process, and along with that, collecting their assets. Now, we also just completed an event with the Northwest Event Show. Where we went with that is we did a lot of the speaker management, but in addition to that, something that we're starting to see a lot more use in is our sponsorship management. So collecting all of the assets throughout the process, getting in their logos, their headshots, that type of thing. But in addition, the sponsors were able to send in any of the assets they needed, including stuff from their exhibitor kit. So those are two of the most recent that have been extremely successful. But there's many that scale from shows that have 1 to 20 speakers, all the way up to over 1,000 speakers. So we really scale throughout the industry.
What is the future of content management?
We think that the future is a simplified, seamless experience for both the event manager and for the speakers. And that goes all the way from, collecting files to collecting submissions to abstract evaluations, really agenda building in addition to that. So whenever we think about the future of it and the future of where Session Board stands, we think that it helps event organizers work smarter, move faster, and improve their ROI by getting a lot of the time back in their event planning process.
Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. To learn about Session Board, head over to sessionboard.com. March was Women's History Month, but the celebration continues with No Agenda with Kelly Gleason-Smith, VP of Sales for Caesars Entertainment. Kelly, it's so nice to have you here with us. What has been your greatest accomplishment in your role so far?
One of the greatest things that I feel like I've accomplished is I've opened opportunities for other team members. Through my earning this position, I was able to give somebody else the opportunity to take my place. I'm really, really moved and motivated by promoting from within. And my promotion offered opportunities for others. And so one pebble fell in the water, and the centrifugal rings expanded, and we were able to have 5 promotions as a result. And I'm really proud of that.
How does Caesars support the advancement of women in their careers?
Caesars feels very strongly about this, so much so that they put into place several years ago that by the year 2025, we will have 50% representation of women and people of color in leadership positions. We were a male-dominated industry, and now we're really putting our efforts into making sure that there's more equality there. So by 2025, 50% of our leadership will be women or people of color.
This industry thrives on relationships. Why are long-term partnerships and relationships important to both planners and to Caesars?
During COVID, we really had faced uncertainty. And I think a lot of us got through those tough times by having strong relationships. And in some cases, COVID brought people together to form relationships that didn't exist before then. As a result, we're able to ebb and flow together. And I think that as we see, the industry and the market change, we are in a high demand time frame where inventory is low and demand is high, and we need to be good partners to the repeat customers that we have, but also make sure that we are finding availability for our new customers. Relationships that we have enable us to have open dialogue, and we have some extraordinary partnerships that extend, in some cases in Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, 50 plus years. And that's a big testament to how we manage the relationships with those customers.
Kelly, congratulations on all of your achievements so far as VP of Sales. We look forward to following your journey.
Big news from trade show giant Informa. The company acquired Tarsus, which operates more than 160 trade shows and media, including Connect, BizBash, and Trade Show News Network. The acquisition will expand Informa's reach into Asia, China, the Middle East, and the Americas. In addition, Informa will add an estimated marketable audience of 1.4 million to its database. If you're planning an international trip and have a U.S. passport, you may want to give yourself the gift of time. U.S. passport processing times extended again. The U.S. State Department says there is unprecedented demand, and shared wait times are taking 10 to 13 weeks from the time an application is received, not including mailing time. Even expedited processing is about 7 to 9 weeks.
Meeting Professionals International is celebrating the success of its European Meetings and Events Conference, EMEC, which took place a little over a week ago in Brighton in the United Kingdom, where the conference welcomed approximately 300 attendees. MPI announced Luxembourg as the host destination for the 2024 edition of this award-winning event. Global Meetings Industry Day was on March 30th, and celebrations took place worldwide. Digitally, event professionals shared powerful statistics, including this. Nearly $100 billion were spent in meetings and events in 2022. Interested in seeing more and finding out how others celebrated? Check out the hashtag GMID2023 for a look back at this incredible day. As we wrap up our first episode of No Agenda, we want to thank you for your support and remind you that our next episode will launch on April 20th.
No Agenda is sponsored by Caesars Entertainment and can be seen on Meetings Today, mine and Courtney's social media channels, and on the Soliman Productions website. If you decide to share this episode, please be sure to use the hashtag NoAgendaTV. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you for more industry updates on April 20th.